so we get it recorded. So quiz due Saturday night, I will grade it so you have answers Sunday. Lecture test Monday morning, lab test in the afternoon. There may be a chance, if you want, we'll discuss this Monday, if you want to have a take-home multiple choice around 50 question quiz 5 to help boost quiz grades and also to help prepare for the final exam. This is going to be something we'll decide on Monday, probably at lab is my guess, or sometime after that test. We'll see what everybody thinks. Maybe before we start the exam or something for lab. Okay, any questions for me? I know that this is a very rough time of the year. I got you, I know. And I'm going to try to take that into account as I set up the lab exam for sure. And I don't think the lecture exam is going to be that bad. I'm hoping, because this is stuff y'all seen in lab as well as stuff we've covered again in lecture. Maybe in a little more detail in some places, but in less than in the lab and others. And then today I just want to show y'all some of those specialized features because I think those are really cool because we don't sometimes realize what they are. Okay, Tyler's here. Okay, guys. So let me get my share screen. I should ask this question first. Were y'all able to watch the video lecture from Wednesday?
I have not yet.
Okay. Has anybody been able to see it?
I haven't either looked yet.
Okay. Okay. So what we'll do then is I'll let you watch that video, and I will kind of take y'all through some of the material, but I'm going to just kind of hit and skip. Okay, is that fine with y'all?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to start with, let's see, which PowerPoint, the shoot. Let's just start with the shoot here. I'm going to skip the plants of the day since we don't have time for those. Okay, shoots, you should be familiar with this. The shoot is the above ground portion, which the leaves, a lot of times we really call it the stem, but really the shoot is more than the stem. Please make sure that you are familiar with the what do you call it? This is the shoot apical meristem. You've got leaf primordia. Leaf primordia are just the new leaves that have developed, and they will continue developing. These right here are leaf primordia that have become bigger and eventually become full-size leaves. And you can know your epidermal meristems, your ground meristems, and your vascular meristems here. That'll be your xylem and phloem developing. You have the same thing on the root, but it's a little different. Your procambium, your vascular meristems are in the middle, as opposed to kind of these spaces that are further out. You don't have ground meristem in the middle like you do with the shoot. You've got it on the sides. So kind of be able to know where those are, your procambium, your ground meristem, your protoderm for the apical meristems. For shoots to grow in those shoot apical meristem areas, you have three-dimensional growth here. This is what's called the corpus. Corpus just means body in Latin. And then there's the outer layers. This is called the tunica. Maybe y'all are familiar with the term tunic, kind of like a coat or shirt or something kind of outer covering. And so they grow outwardly. You can see the corpus and the tunica here of your meristem. Yeah, that's pretty much what I want to hit for this. You can see them all labeled here again: procambium, protoderm, your ground meristem. Those red areas are going to become xylem and phloem because those are procambium. We've got a lot of growth going on here. These are axillary buds, okay, in the axils of these leaves. Even though these leaves are not very big yet, they will get bigger, and so will these. And these axillary buds have little shoot apical meristems, just like we've got right here. And the same thing will occur if it continues to grow, which we see sometimes when this part gets cut off, that jumps in. Here's a cool coleus. You can see the orientation of how the leaves are opposite, and then they go the other direction, opposite, opposite, opposite. And that's what we see with the coleus plant in the lab. So this is their shoot apical meristem. Okay. That shoots, stems. We've talked about the steels. So this was kind of a review of some things. We've covered this: protosteel, siphonosteel, eusteel. Monocots are, scattered steels. Their vascular bundles are scattered. It's a eusteel. It's a type of eusteel. Most of these are annuals, or if they're herbaceous. There are some perennial monocots like bamboo and so on, but they're not able to grow wood. So we know that's kind of the idea. Herbaceous is non-woody. I'm going to skip this. When you get to the dicot, you get that concentric ring of vascular bundles, and that allows you for the chance to create potential wood over time. So these can be woody, and you can tell the difference. The one on the left is a monocot, the one on the right is a dicot, so you can see the difference. One thing to note is the remember the fascicular and interfascicular cambia that we have in the lab. You see that here between your phloem and the xylem. You don't have that over here because you're not going. That fascicular cambium is going to allow for a ring to be made. You don't get that made in these vascular bundles of a monocot. Okay, you can see wood. 1, 2, 3. You get rings. The rings are made of xylem. Outwardly, you get phloem. Sometimes you get things like rays, which are like these interesting, like different shapes. They're also moving in slightly different. Since they're moving, they're oriented in different directions. So, but we've seen this in lab. Keep in mind, I'm going to keep your test for material to what we covered in the video from Wednesday that you haven't watched yet. Okay, this is just kind of a little bit of a review of things that you'll see in lab as well as in lecture. The only thing, I'll show you exactly what I'm going to pull from today's that's going to be on the test, but I will keep your test questions on test 4 to what was covered in that other PowerPoint from Wednesday, okay? Which was it's a condensed version of what I've got today. Does that make sense? Okay, so all of this stuff right here, this is more of a review, a little bit of lab stuff basically as well. Okay, do y'all have any questions? Am I going too fast through these things? Okay, it's going to fine. Okay. I don't want to go too fast. Okay, the rays are, if you remember when we talked about that, you know how we talked about different wood sections, the cross section versus radial versus tangential sections, and we looked for those little dots, and it was most xylem moves up and down, but there's some that move this way, and you can always see the end of it sometimes, and it helps you to know which cut of wood. Well, you get rays in the xylem, but you also can get rays in the phloem and we see those sometimes. So just those are the sideways moving versions. So here's a phloem ray. Even though we get phloem that usually goes up and down, just like xylem goes up and down, but sometimes you have to have lateral movement, and that's all that rays are. They're just lateral movement. And I say movement, they're not moving. Lateral flow, they're oriented so that you have movement of phloem product this way as opposed to up and down. Make sense? Okay. A big terminology that's probably something we really haven't said much about, but it is important, is something called the bifacial initials in the vascular cambium. All this means is that that fascicular cambium that goes all the way around, it's fascicular, interfascicular, fascicular, dividing up that concentric ring inside of the dicot. When you're making wood and that continues outwards, what happens is that cambium, remember cambium is a meristem, so it's making new cells. It makes cells to the inside and to the outside. If it's to the inside, it becomes a xylem. If it's the outside, it becomes a phloem. That sounds familiar, right? Okay. And it does this one cell at a time. So an initial cell is just a cell that's literally the cell that becomes something else. When it divides, it will divide a cell that will become a xylem, and then it will divide a cell that becomes a phloem, and then it will divide a cell that becomes a xylem, and then it divides a cell that becomes a phloem. And you see how it slowly works its way outwards. It's bifacial because it just means it has two faces, two sides. It's actually actively dividing to both sides of itself, not just to one. Okay, makes sense for bifacial initials? Bifacial division? Okay. We're going to skip the types of, we talked about the fascicular and fascicular cambium. Okay. You may wonder why grass, when you cut it, continues to grow. It's because, when you cut off a meristem, doesn't that mean that you cut off the growth? Well, the crazy thing about grass is when you cut, look at the numbers here, like 7, 8, 6, 5, 4. Those are actually leaves. That's not a stem. Actually, those are leaves, and the actual stem is much more compressed down to the bottom. So when you cut your grass, you're actually just cutting the leaves off the top. And now, here at the W, what we do, we like to mow almost down to the dirt. Y'all may have seen this. What happens when you mow almost to the dirt? Do you kill the grass? Absolutely. Because you get close enough to the bottom, you actually cut where the meristems are located. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Okay, even though that meristem is very compressed, normally we cut it up here, and your grass will just put out new leaves from that really small, low stem. But if we cut it too low, then you can't actually kill it. So, you like my bark? Ha ha ha. So a little bit of bark. We've talked about this in the past too. Your bark is made of periderm, the cork cambium that makes the cork, and then the living phloem. Inside of that, your vascular cambium that makes the phloem and also xylem to the inside. The sapwood is the xylem that's active and actually has something moving through it, and heartwood is the xylem that no longer has anything moving through it. And you can see them, they're different colors usually. We don't want to call sapwood living xylem because technically the cells are dead. They're just being used. Whereas the heartwood are also dead. They're just being unused. Okay. So our cork cambium is our phelogen. Cork is our phloem. And the pheloderm is the living parenchyma tissue just inside of that. So that's part of our periderm. You know how we saw the lenticels in lab all along the stem, those little dots? This is what they look like. They allow for gas exchange. It's kind of a break in that wood. They're like little scars, they kind of look like, but they're breaks through it that allow for gas exchange to make it in under that waterproofing of cork campium. Here's that heartwood versus sapwood. You can really see the difference, heartwood versus sapwood. You may have noticed that some trees will die, like not just die, they'll rot in the middle and they'll be hollow. How can they live through that? It's because that heartwood is not being used for anything but structure. Brandy, I just realized where you are. I wasn't paying attention till just now. Okay, now for me, the fun part is to talk about specialized versions of all these things. So stems, we know what a stem is, but there are some specialized uses of stems. So rhizomes are horizontal underground stems usually, although there are some things that have above ground rhizomes. And that's not to be confused with what's called a stolon or a runner, which is a horizontal stem that's above ground that kind of works its way. Has anybody ever grown strawberries before? You know how they put out that one line and then they'll plant another plant. And then once it gets established, you can actually cut it and you've got a whole new plant. But that extension out is called a stolon. And at the node of that stem, a new plant can take root. And what kind of roots are those when you've got roots coming off of a stem, even if it's at a node of a stem?
Adventitious.
Yep. Bulbs and corms are also specialized stems. So if you buy bulbs to plant or corms, they look like bulbs, but they're mostly stem tissue, where bulbs are a stem with leaves. So think about like an onion as a bulb. Corms would be, if you've ever grown gladiolus plants, those are corms. They're really hard a lot of times. So you can see some of those, the stolon, or they're also called a runner. Here's that rhizome. This is an example of like an iris. Potato is a tuber, a specialized one. And it's kind of like a rhizome, but it's a food storage rhizome, if you want to call that. And it's not all the roots do that. Tendrils, you might find tendrils like on your pea plants or on a grapevine are actually modified leaves. Sorry, modified stems. Sometimes they can be modified leaves, depends. How do you know the difference? Well, if the tendril has an axillary bud, then it is a leaf. If that tendril comes from where the axillary bud is, and it's in the axil of where a leaf was or is, then it's a modified stem. Do y'all see the difference there? All depends on like how it's being produced. And then thorns. Oh, I forgot one. I should mention cladophylls first before I get there. Cladophylls are flattened out stems that act like leaves. We see this example down here on the right, but I think a cactus is an even better example. Okay, like the pad of a cactus. Modified thorns. So thorns are modified stems. And then we're going to come back to these again. Spines are modified leaves, and prickles are actually parts of the epidermis. All of them poke you, and we don't use the terms correctly in everyday life, but thorns are stems, spines are leaves, and prickles are actually the epidermis. Okay? Prickles, for example, would be on a rose. Notice that when you think about a rose thorn, it's actually a rose prickle because they develop all along the stem, even in the internode region. Spines, on the other hand, are like what you get with a cactus, and those would have been leaves. Thorns are things that would have been stems. So thorns, an actual good example of thorns would be, for those of you that collected You might not have collected an example of it, but you probably saw it. The horse apple, hedge apple plant, the big green ball that was out of Plymouth Club. That thing has thorns all along it, and those thorns actually develop from the axil of those leaves. So those are actually what would have been stems, so they are thorns. Okay, so I told you I would tell you what might be on the test. So if I ask you to name, 2 or 3 specialized stems, and how would you know it's a stem? You might be able to do that, maybe. A tuber, a tendril, a thorn. How would you know? Look to see if it's growing from an axillary bud, and also looking to see if it's growing adventitious roots, both of which are stem features. Okay. There's your cladophil. What do we call this little spot here? If these are spines that develop from leaves, and this cladophil is a stem acting like a leaf, what actually are these little spots? Think about it. On a stem, where do the leaves grow? What do we call that spot where the leaves come off a stem?
Are they nodes?
Those are nodes. Yep, those are nodes. So that's kind of cool. Okay. Now, we're not going to get into this much because y'all are familiar with the alternate opposite. At the node, it all depends on if the leaves are coming directly opposite each other off the same node, or if you've got them coming off of different nodes, and that's alternating. Stipules are something that we've talked a little bit about, and there's sometimes little things that poke out at the bottom of a leaf. They're not coming from the axillary bud. You can see it on a like blackberry. There's some on roses, but they don't look really pokey though. They actually are kind of rounded in some species. But they're this little extra appendage that sticks out. Don't know why. I don't know what it's used for. No idea. And we covered most of this in lab. Terminal bud scale scars. You've got lenticels. There are bundle scale scars inside your leaf scar. You've got axillary buds. Okay. Your petiole of your leaf, your blade, your margins. Okay. Everybody good to go there? Okay. I'm going to kind of ignore the stuff on the wood. I thought this was just a fun picture of the knots. So knots in wood like this, no, this is not actually a polar bear, but it sure looks like one. These knots are where branches fell off of a tree, and so there's scars inside of the wood where branches used to be. So if you ever wonder what causes a knot, that's what that is. That's where branches used to be. They fell off or were damaged or were cut off, as the case may be. Why would you find them in greater concentration in the older parts of the log? Well, the older parts are where when it was smaller, and it would have had more branches in those areas, right? Because it was a smaller tree and they would have been more concentrated. As the tree got bigger, those branches would have been further away. So bigger trees have lots of area without knots inside of their xylem. Okay, remember they get bigger and bigger and bigger. They'll cover those scars over as they grow. Okay, we'll ignore that. I put this out here. This is a picture from El Salvador. I did not take it. But wood is really important as a fuel source. Okay, we all know this, not just for heating of homes, but also for cooking. Okay, my brother-in-law's mother totally does this in her house, except hers is made of brick, not this, not the kind of clay. But she totally does make her tortillas and beans and stuff on a wood-fired stove inside the house. It makes you cough like crazy. Okay. With that much smoke in the house. One little side note, just kind of fun something. You ever wondered why wood is absorbent? You know, why does wood like take on water? Well, isn't that its job? Because wood is just a bunch of xylem, right? So if you get a wood table and you sit down a drink on it that's got water condensing and it creates that ring, well, why does it do that? It's because wood's absorbent. Wood is strong, but wood is absorbent. So it's kind of an interesting little thing. Okay, I was going to show y'all plantains. So sad. Okay, leaves I think are pretty simple. We know the petiole, the blade, the margins, all that stuff we covered in lab. We know the pinnately compound versus palmately compound. What are you looking to tell a compound a leaf from a simple leaf? Look at the little axillary bud. Look at that little axillary bud right there. That tells you this entire thing is a leaf. And I know that y'all kind of got caught last Monday. Both groups had the same thing. Y'all took off what you thought was a branch when it was actually a leaf. And not even the whole leaf at that. Okay. We know what leaves are for. We're not going to go into great detail. We'll tell you that you can actually see sometimes where the root pressure of water is higher than the pressure of water up here. It will actually force water out. This is called guttation. Kind of fun pictures. I've seen this in real life. Usually happens in the morning. Otherwise, the pressure reverses and it works a little differently. Okay, phyllotaxy is just your leaf arrangement. You can get opposite, you can get alternate, and there are some plants that do whorled, but I don't know of any woody plants that do whorled. Okay, most of them are going to be, at least the ones I'm familiar with, are going to be herbaceous. Whorled is just where you have all your leaves coming off of the same node in one spot. It can be 6. I've seen 4, 6, 8 leaves from one spot, and then you go up to the next node and you've got however many the number is. So some species it's 6, 6, 6, 6, and it keeps going. Others it's 8, and they're even related species that have different numbers. Okay, venation, y'all are familiar with. Reticulate, reticulate, parallel. This is specifically palmately reticulate, pinnately reticulate. Make sure that you always say palmate venation or palmately compound. Don't just say palmate because I don't know which one you're referring to. You talking about venation or are you talking about compound? Okay. What do I really want to show you? Okay, specialized leaves. Okay. There are sun leaves and shade leaves. I tried to talk about this last week, but I forgot that we hadn't covered it yet. Sun leaves, of course, are the ones that grow at the top of the tree, and shade leaves grow at the bottom. You can see a different amount of mesophyll that do photosynthesis for a sun leaf versus a shade leaf. I don't know about y'all, but that's pretty cool. That's on the same plant. Arid leaves, those who live in very dry environments, have these little stomatal crypts where it protects the stomata, tries to keep the water from leaving. You get more epidermis. Sometimes you get more hair, maybe more cutin to protect the epidermis from water loss. That happens. We've seen this in lab. Aquatic plants have the stomata on top instead of on the bottom because they're in the water and they have spaces where it lets them sometimes hold air and help them to be more buoyant. Here's tendrils again, but these are tendrils that are leaves as opposed to tendrils that are stems. Always look to see where they develop from. Down here on this plant, you can see the tendril is across from another leaf. Well, wait a minute. These are here opposite, opposite. That must be a leaf as well because those are opposite, opposite, opposite. Which is a little confusing when you're in the grape family like we see up here. This is actually Virginia creeper. They're considered to be alternating leaves, but every time you alternate, the other side is a tendril. So in some ways, I would say they're actually opposite leaves, but they just have modified leaves on the other side always. And then we've covered the spines, thorns, prickles. And I like this diagram because you can see which is which. So the one in the middle is definitely the prickle, right? because there's no leaf or stem connection here. This is just on the internode. On the right, what would you say? Uh, is this a thorn, which comes from a stem, or a spine, which comes from a leaf? One on the right.
Thorn.
It's a thorn. Why do you say that?
It looks like one.
It looks like one. Well,
And
go ahead.
no, you.
Well, I was going to say the one on the right the one on the left looks like a thorn too, but it's not. So why is the one on the right a thorn? Look at where the leaf is. Now, sometimes you get a little confused here. This one looks like it's on the bottom and then the leaf's on top. But look at every spot. Look, leaf, right there's the axil. Wouldn't you call that the axil? Here's the stem, here's the petiole, there's the axil. Here's the leaf, the stem, the axil. This is the axillary bud that would have become a stem, so therefore it must be a thorn. On the right, look at these little leaves. Those are actually developing in the axil, aren't they? This is going to be a new stem. New stem, new stem. What is this then? If this is the axil and this is the stem, this is going to be a new stem, that must be a leaf. So it's a spine. Do y'all see why I say that? Okay, so these are modified leaves. They have leaves, but they still have modified ones too. Then there's some fun ones. You get storage leaves, all the succulents you're used to seeing. There's urn-like flower pot leaves, there's window leaves, reproductive leaves. We can actually see some of the reproductive leaves down here, some of the leaves that grow things from them. Those are a little odd to me. And then there's leaves that look like flowers. So this is the flower pot up here. They've been cut in half. Normally you don't see inside them, but ants will actually bring soil up inside, and these leaves will basically be a little home for the ants, and they fill it full of dirt, which is good for them because these plants will then grow roots from inside. Isn't that weird? To grow roots inside yourself to be able to grow get your nutrients. It's crazy. Here's some of these little reproductive ones. This is the succulent. This is a jade plant. This one's fascinating. This is the window leaf. Window leaves are basically, what happens is the photosynthesis doesn't take place up on the top. Photosynthesis actually penetrates further down into the tissue. And in that photosynthesis situation, these plants actually live in the desert and places where they might get eaten. Sometimes they look like rocks. They look more rock-like. And when they do that, it makes them, their green parts don't show, so it makes them camouflage better. So their green part is further down into the plant, their photosynthetic part. So it's called a window leaf because the window allows for the light to make it further in. And then this is a poinsettia. By the way, these are the flowers of the poinsettia. These big red things are actually just bracts. Those are modified leaves to look like petals. These are another couple of specialized ones that are fun. These are carnivorous plants. This is a sundew. They're sticky, and when an insect crawls across it, it gets stuck, and then it gets digested. Or in this case, these are little pitcher plants. Things will fall down in them, and they have hairs that point downwards, so they try to climb out, and they can't push against those little hairs. So yeah, the plants will digest you. So insect trapping plants. So pitcher and sundew. We've even got the Venus flytrap, which we know closes. It's a leaf that closes. And these right here are aquatic, called bladderworts, and then they trap little things underwater inside them and digest them. So crazy stuff out there. Okay, we're not going to get into that, but color change, we've talked some about this. It's just the chlorophyll breaks down, and then we start to see some of these other colors. One thing I learned a little more recently, which I didn't fully understand, is that anthocyanins are not usually the colors that give you the reds or blues. Don't in a lot of plants actually develop until the plant starts to break down chlorophyll. So some of these bright red colors actually show up in the fall, but not before. Okay. There is a question on your quiz about leaf abscission. Okay. So where the stem and the leaf touch, we know that that leaf can fall off if it's a deciduous plant. Okay. And there is a place along, like, so here, so it's hard to tell, but this right here is going to become the axillary bud. Here's the leaf, here's the vascular tissue, and there's an abscission zone right there where it will eventually break off. Okay. It's called a separation layer. And then you get what's called suberin attached. Basically, it becomes a waterproofing to cover the wound. Okay, and we've all seen these wounds because we call them leaf scars, don't we? Okay, but this will fall off. So you probably want to be able to make sure that you're familiar with stem. Let's see if I can draw this real quick. So you're going to have stem. Here's your leaf. Here's your axillary bud. And if we were to zoom in, you're going to get a break right there at the abscission zones, right there, where that leaf's going to come off. Okay. Okay. Real quick, just the last thing I wanted to show you. I want to show you some specialized roots. Just for fun. Food storage roots, sweet potatoes. Wait a minute, sweet potatoes and potatoes are not the same thing? No, they're not. Sweet potatoes are actually roots. Those are not adventitious things. They're actually roots. Whereas potatoes are underground stems because they can actually, potatoes can grow a new stem that goes up into the light. Here you don't get that. You just get one end that grows. You get water storage things. I mean, really interesting plants that do that store water. And then some will actually put out roots and then put up a new plant. These are called suckers, which are basically adventitious buds. Fruit trees do this. Nematophores you find in things like our bald cypress or our mangrove trees. Sometimes you'll see something like that. But then you'll also see prop roots. And these are prop roots where they actually come out. They're roots that are above ground and they'll come out like, you've seen this on corn maybe, how corn will have little roots that grows out and then it kind of holds itself up. We see this with trees. This is an amazing example of prop roots on a huge kind of interconnected tree and branches. So here's those prop roots on corn and related to corn. Here's a mangrove set of prop roots. What do you think these do? It props them up. And then there's the really cool ones, like these little contractile roots where they grow and it actually pulls the plant further down into the ground. Isn't that cool? So there's parasitic roots. They have parasites and instead of growing into the ground, they grow into other plants and they take their nutrients. And then we have buttress roots that are kind of like prop roots, but they provide stability like a buttress of a building. Okay, and then you have mycorrhizae attached to roots. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to show y'all some of that because I think those specialized things are kind of fun. But yeah, I've enjoyed having botany with y'all. It's odd as all get out to kind of end on a test like we're going to do. But please let me know if you've got questions. The quiz is up and available. It's open book. I'll repeat that. The quiz 4 is open book. And think about whether you want to have a take-home multiple choice quiz 5. Okay. We'll talk about it. And that will be for helping with taking you through all the material to kind of prepare for the final exam. If you don't want that extra work, we don't have to do it.
I tell you right now, yes, I want it. Please.
One thing we could do is instead of counting it as a full quiz, I could use it as a replacement for one of your other quizzes. So if you do it and you do better on it, let it replace a lower quiz. If you don't do it, then it doesn't matter. So that's an option as well. So y'all tell me Monday what you want, because I'll be getting it ready over the weekend. Yeah. Okay, Elena, you asked a great question. I had intended to do the final by Zoom. Do y'all want to do it in person? We can. I figured if we do it by Zoom and we do it on Canvas, it'll be graded faster. I just figure we'll keep the same pattern we've been doing. But we'll have 3 hours to take it. I may have to literally take my phone with me because I have to go to Heritage after y'all and give another final exam. So if for some reason y'all are still going, I may just take y'all over there and do it there too. Kind of have 2 exams going at once. They're supposed to be at different times, like one's at 11, when y'all finish at 11. I don't know if y'all are going to actually need that much time, but you do have 3 hours. I'm not going to cut you off. Okay. If you have any concerns, anything, and think about, do you want the quiz to count as a quiz 5, or do you just want it, you want us to do it as a replacement? If you do it, you do it. You don't, you don't.
Which one would be better, the extra grade or the replacement?
If you have one bad quiz grade, a replacement would be better. But if you've got, well, actually, I think we're probably replacing it's probably going to be better. I'm thinking in terms of numbers. We do math real quick. Let me just see. It will depend. It really will depend. How about this? I'll be really nice. I'll calculate it both ways. If you do it, I'll calculate it both ways and see which one helps you best. I think that's fair. That way, if you don't want to take it, you don't want to do it because you're busy and you've got Thanksgiving and you just want to study other ways, you don't have to. And you can take your 4 quiz grades. And then I'll see if we take it out of 5 or out of 4. Okay, we'll just do it that way. Give you best of both worlds. You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to let y'all go. Like I said, email me over the weekend if you need anything. That quiz is due tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow night. Okay. So that I can get it graded and see your answers for you on Sunday. Okay. Okay. I will talk to y'all later.
Thank you. Have a great day.
That's it. I'm going to post this to Canvas.